If a record exists, but the government says it's private, exempt, or can't be released, how do you know whether that's legitimate or just convenient? And when an agency hands you pages of black boxes, how do you tell the difference between lawful privacy protection and a transparency failure hiding in plain sight? Hello and welcome to the Jersey Signal Podcast. My name is Christopher Lotito, and this podcast explains how New Jersey government works, where power actually lives, and why accountability so often falls short. This is episode 9, and today we are returning to our Public Records 101 series, picking up the thread from episode 6 on OPRA enforcement. If episode 6 was about what to do after denial, today is about why those denials and redactions happen in the first place and how to evaluate whether they're lawful. Some quick housekeeping before we dive in. After episode 6, the podcast took a brief detour. Episode 7 was a case study on family leave, how policy looks on paper versus real life. Episode 8 was a legislative update on what's happening right now in Trenton. Starting today with episode 9, we are officially back in the OPRA series, picking up exactly where we left off. If you haven't listened to episode 6, I strongly recommend doing that first. That episode covered the mechanics of enforcement, the Government Records Council, court actions, timelines, and remedies. Today's episode assumes that foundation and adds a critical layer: privacy, redactions, and withholding. This is not an episode about memorizing every exemption in OPRA. This episode is about literacy. It's about learning how to read an OPRA response the way a custodian or agency lawyer reads it, so you can tell when a privacy claim is grounded in law, a redaction is defensible but narrow, or the response is padded, overbroad, or strategically vague. Today, we are setting the framework that will carry us through the next several episodes. 3 ways government limits access under OPRA. When people think about OPRA failures, they usually imagine outright denials. In practice, there are 3 common limitation tactics: full denial, no responsive records, or records are exempt; partial compliance, where some records are released and others are withheld entirely; and finally, redaction-heavy release, documents technically produced, but so heavily redacted that they're functionally useless. Episodes 1 through 6 focused largely on the first category. From episode 9 forward, we are focusing on the second and third, because this is where most transparency battles actually happen. Privacy as the all-purpose justification. One word appears more than any other in OPRA responses: privacy. Redacted due to privacy. Exempt under privacy considerations. Personal information withheld. Here's the key thing to understand: privacy is not a blank check under OPRA. OPRA requires custodians to do 3 things when they invoke privacy. Number 1, identify the specific legal basis for withholding. Number 2, apply the exemption narrowly, not broadly. And number 3, release any segregable, non-exempt portions of the record. When any of those steps are missing, the response is potentially challengeable. Federal privacy laws. The FERPA example. Let's talk briefly about one law you will see constantly in New Jersey OPRA responses: FERPA. FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, protects student education records. That's real and it matters. But FERPA does not automatically exempt entire documents, apply to aggregate data with no student identifiers, or cover administrative records just because a school created them. Yet, in practice, FERPA is often cited as a conversation stopper, not a carefully applied exemption. In upcoming episodes, we'll break down FERPA line by line. For now, the takeaway is this. When you see FERPA cited, ask yourself, is this actually a student education record? Could the record be redacted instead of withheld entirely? Is the agency explaining how FERPA applies, or just naming it? Redaction versus over-redaction. Redaction itself is not a problem, it's required. The problem is over-redaction. When agencies redact entire paragraphs instead of names, dates, locations, or policy rationales, and information that is embarrassing but not private. Lawful redaction protects specific data elements. Unlawful over-redaction protects institutional comfort. One practical test you can apply. If every meaningful fact is removed, but the document is technically released, the agency may be complying with the letter of OPRA while violating its purpose. That distinction matters in enforcement. Why partial compliance discourages pushback. Here's a structural problem in OPRA enforcement. Many requesters stop once something is produced. Agencies are aware of this. A response with dozens of pages, mostly blacked out, feels final, even when it isn't. That psychological effect is one of the most effective anti-transparency tools available. But under OPRA, partial compliance does not end your rights. You can challenge the scope of redactions, the justification offered, or the failure to explain why material was withheld. How to strengthen your position before enforcement. Before you ever file with the GRC or go to court, there are steps you can take that dramatically improve your odds. Precision in requests. Narrow by record type, time frame, or decision maker, not subject matter alone. Ask follow-up questions. Ask custodians to clarify the legal basis for redactions. And of course, create a paper trail. Polite written challenges build a record of reasonableness. Enforcement bodies look closely at whether a requester engaged in good faith clarification before escalating. Transparency doesn't fail only when records are denied. It fails when records are released in ways that prevent understanding, pattern recognition, or accountability. Over-redaction hides systems. Misapplied privacy law chills inquiry, and silence favors power. Learning how to evaluate privacy claims is not optional if you want OPRA to work. Quick pause here. If this series has been helpful, please like the episode, subscribe to the Jersey Signal podcast, and share it with anyone trying to navigate OPRA for public records for the first time. This project grows through listeners who need practical tools, not abstractions. What agencies are required to tell you after redacting? Let's get concrete about what an OPRA request is supposed to include when records are redacted or withheld. A lawful OPRA response is not just a packet of documents with black boxes scattered across the page. When an agency withholds or redacts information, the custodian is expected to explain themselves. That means identifying the specific statute or exemption they are relying on, describing the general category of information being withheld, and making a real effort to release any non-exempt material that can reasonably be separated out. When you receive a response that simply says something like, redacted for privacy, with no explanation beyond that, it isn't just frustrating, it's weak. Even when records themselves are legitimately exempt in part, the justification almost never is. Under OPRA, agencies are expected to articulate why information is withheld, not just assert that it is. Reading redactions as signals, not just obstacles. Here's a mindset shift that helps enormously. Redactions themselves are actually information as well. Instead of seeing black boxes as the end of the road, start looking for patterns. Pay attention to what is consistently missing across documents. Are names removed, but titles or roles left intact? Are dates or locations routinely absent? Are explanations or rationales disappearing while routine facts remain? Those patterns often point to something real, a particular decision maker, a recurring policy concern, or a legal theory the agency is trying to shield. Once you start reading redactions this way, they stop being random obstacles and start becoming guides for what to ask for next. Follow-up requests as a transparency tool. Many people assume that once records are released, redacted or not, the process is over. In practice, follow-up OPRA requests are one of the most effective transparency tools available. You might request the same category of records for a different time period, ask for the written policies that govern how redactions are applied, or seek communications discussing the decision to redact or withhold information in the first place. These kinds of follow-ups often reveal whether privacy claims are being applied narrowly and consistently, or whether they were improvised to deal with a particular request. OPRA works best when it's treated as a process, not a single transaction. When narrowing a request helps, and when it hurts. Agencies frequently ask requesters to narrow their requests. Sometimes that's reasonable, sometimes it's strategic. Narrowing can genuinely help when it reduces volume without changing substance, or when it shifts focus towards specific record types, timeframes, or decision makers. But narrowing becomes a problem when it forces you to adopt the agency's framing, cuts off categories of records you haven't seen yet, or makes it harder to detect patterns. A good rule of thumb is this: never narrow a request until you understand what you're giving up. Once you remove something from scope, it may be much harder to argue later that it should have been included. How enforcement bodies view over-redaction. This matters for anyone even considering a complaint with the Government Records Council or a court filing. Enforcement bodies don't expect agencies to get everything perfect, but they do look closely at how redactions are handled. They pay attention to whether explanations are given in good faith, whether exemptions are applied consistently, and whether there is evidence that the agency tried to separate exempt information from material that should have been released. Responses that rely on vague privacy claims, redact entire sections without explanation, or refuse to clarify their reasoning tend to raise credibility issues for agencies. That's why your written follow-ups matter. They don't just seek more information, they document your reasonableness and the agency's choices, which becomes important if enforcement is ever necessary. What's coming next? In the next episodes, we'll go deeply into FERPA myths versus reality, how agencies actually decide what to redact, common redaction abuse patterns, practical ways to push back without immediately filing enforcement action, and other issues. These episodes are designed for journalists, advocates, and residents who want to understand how decisions are made in their communities. Thanks for listening to the Jersey Signal podcast. For templates, examples, and follow-ups, subscribe to the Jersey Signal Project on Substack. As always, share your questions and experiences with OPRA enforcement. The Signal is only getting stronger.